Hello everyone, my name is Kelly Johnson and I'm a Curriculum Officer at NCFE. You're very welcome to this webinar for Unit 4 of the Level 1 and Level 2 Technical Award in Interactive Media. I'm joined today by Leslie Davis, one of our external quality assurers and a subject specialist in interactive media. The plan for today's webinar is to give you an overview of this BCert qualification, a summary of the learning outcomes and the grading descriptors for Unit 4. We'll look at a Level 2 merit piece of work and then a Level 2 pass piece of work, and finally to address any questions you may have, but do ask questions throughout the webinar. But first I'd like to do a quick poll on how confident you're currently feeling with the marking and grading of Unit 4. 1 is no or little confidence and 10 being very confident. So I'm just going to launch that poll. Okay, it's quite a mixed bag. At the moment, we've got 50% between the 1 and 2 bracket and 50% on the 5 and 6. I'll just leave that open for 10 more seconds or so, just to give people the opportunity to put their response in. Okay, I'm just going to close that poll now. We've got the responses in. Like I said, a bit of a mixed bag, 50% down there in the 1s and 2s and 50% 5 to 6. So let's hope that the webinar today, the content of this webinar, will help you feel more confident by the end. This webinar will be focusing on Unit 4 of Interactive Media, but I'm going to provide a brief summary of the qualification. And if you do need a more comprehensive overview, then please join or view one of our induction webinars for the Level 1 and Level 2 Technical Awards. The Level 1 and Level 2 Technical Award in Interactive Media consists of an external assessment worth 40% and internally assessed coursework worth 60%. Interactive Media has 4 units and each unit is internally assessed with the coursework. These units are usually assessed with the invigilated external assessment. Learners are entitled to 1 resubmission of the internally assessed coursework following the EQA visit. If your learners are doing the Level 2 qualification, then they'll need to achieve a minimum of a Level 2 pass in each internal assessment and the external assessment. Qual Hub will be your primary go-to for resources, the specification, assessments, regulations, and much more. If you begin typing in your qualification subject area, qualification code, or even just Level 2 Technical Award, it will give you a list of suggested quals. We have assignments ready for you to use on the Interactive Media Qual Hub page. And there is an assignment for each internally assessed unit. You may wish to change aspects of the scenario so that it can be more suitably contextualized for your learners. The first thing on the brief will be the scenario. This is designed to give a real-life situation in order to help set the assignment in context. After that, the assignment gives some further details on the specific information that should be included. And then the way the evidence can be presented, and we have tried to keep this as open as possible to appeal to many different types of learners. And on the following page, the grade descriptors are given, which is what the learners need to do for that grade and what the assessor will be using when marking the assignment. Each unit consists of 3 or 4 learning outcomes, and each learning outcome is graded. To get a pass in the unit, then the learners need to achieve a minimum of a pass for each learning outcome. If they get a pass in one outcome and get merits in the other 2 outcomes, then the final grade is still a pass. The final grade for the unit will be the lowest grade the learner achieved in a learning outcome. However, there is compensatory grading system when combining all the units at the end. Now, if you're currently delivering this qualification, then undoubtedly you've been affected to some extent by the COVID-19 pandemic, and I just want to provide you with an update on the current situation. This qualification can be assessed by teacher-assessed grades, but internal assessment should continue wherever possible. The external assessment for this academic year has been cancelled, so they would have been assessed via a teacher-assessed grade, but they must be booked onto the external assessment window first before any tag can be submitted. If your learner already has a banked external assessment grade, then a tag doesn't need to be submitted, which is also true for the internal assessments. If a learner is entitled to a resit, then a tag can be submitted for that. And we'll be asking for the tags on an assessment level rather than a qualification level. That is, you'll be letting us know that the tag for the external assessment and the internal assessment separately, rather than an overall tag for the entire qualification. Any tags should be based on evidence you have, and this can be from any already completed or banked assessments, evidence for other assessments, for example, mock exams, teacher conducted formative assessment, internal assessment activities, etc., and any classwork or homework that has been completed by the learners. Tags can also be submitted for middle flight learners, those learners who are in the first year of a 2-year course, such as Year 10 learners. These learners can have tags for any assessment they would normally have completed during this academic year. Before tags can be added onto the portal, your tag strategy form must be completed and submitted by the 7th of May of this year. And the deadline for submitting your grades onto the portal is the 18th of June this year. The link to the strategy form can be found on our website in the COVID-19 Response 2020-2021 section at the top of the page. Okay, so that was a brief overview of the qualification. I'm just going to do a quick check to see if there's any questions. It doesn't look like there's any come through yet, but please do bear in mind that if you do have any questions, please do pop them into the questions box and we will answer them as we go through. So now I'm going to hand over to Leslie, who will go through and give you a quick summary, a summary of the unit and each learning outcome, and also show you some example work.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through Unit 4 for interactive media. So Unit 4 is about learners presenting and promoting an interactive media product. So it's important to realise that this unit has been designed to be delivered at the end of the qualification. So after Unit 1, which, as you'll be aware, is an introductory unit, Unit 2, which is very much about planning, Unit 3, where learners will create a product or products, and then this Unit 4 is about presenting and promoting an interactive media product. So it makes sense to actually use the product or products that have been created in Unit 3 for this unit. And there's 3 learning outcomes for Unit 4. So learning outcome 1 is understanding how to promote skills and present an interactive media product within the creative media industry. So very much a research investigation learning outcome for learning outcome 1. Learning outcome 2 is the practical part of the unit, where they will actually present a product of their own and promote their skills. And learning outcome 3 is the review of that presentation in learning outcome 2. And how they promoted their skills. So as Kelly pointed out earlier on, it is required that assessors set and issue an internal assessment task. So sometimes we refer to these as project briefs or assignment briefs. So this is a requirement for this unit as it's internally assessed. So how that would work is the unit content would be delivered and then an internal assessment task issued after all of that unit content has been delivered. And that's where learners will respond independently. So after all the teaching and learning content has taken place. Now there is a number of approaches that centres may wish to do this. Some centres like to issue 3 small assignments. Some centres like to issue 1 large assignment. So for example, the content for learning outcome 1 could be delivered and then an internal assessment task set for learning outcome 1. And that would just target the assessment criteria for learning outcome 1. They could then present the product for learning outcome 2, deliver that content for learning outcome 2, and then issue an assignment, a small internal assessment task where they would present their interactive media product. And then the same for learning outcome 3. So content would be delivered, and then a evaluation or review task would be issued to assess that criteria for learning outcome. Or alternatively, you may want to deliver all of the unit content and then issue one larger project or assignment at the end of the unit that would target the assessment criteria for all learning outcomes. So we'll first take a look at learning outcome 1. So here we can see the unit content for learning outcome 1. So this is the content that needs to be delivered to learners. And we can see that the first bullet point, so it's learners must know about. First bullet point here is methods of presenting interactive media products. So that's for both levels 1 and levels 2. So both levels of learners will need to evidence that within their internal assessment. You can then see that there is 2 additional pieces of evidence for level 1, and they're slightly different. So at level 1, learners need to know about methods of professional promotion and regarding who the intended audience may be for particular products. And at level 2, slightly different. Again, this is in addition to that first bullet point, methods of presenting interactive media products. At level 2, they need to know about the types of client and their needs, also the types of job opportunities in the interactive media industry, and then also methods of promoting their skills. So similarities, but more demand there at level 2 for the content and the evidence that needs to be demonstrated. And then just a note here on client needs at level 2. So this is actually, if we think about that as the purpose of the interactive media product. So for example, different client briefs will have different needs. So they might have different target audiences, they might have different purposes. For example, it might be an educational product or it might be an entertainment-based product. So that's a little bit of exemplification there of what is meant by client needs. So here we can see the level 2 assessment criteria. Under all grades at pass, merit and distinction, the key descriptor here is describe. So it's a description that's expected at pass, merit and distinction. However, the content will vary, which we'll take a look at now. So what learners first need to do is they need, at level 2, they need to be evidencing the different client needs of products. They also need to be evidencing that they have researched and looked for opportunities within the industry. So in addition to those 2 elements, they must also, for a pass, describe a single method of presentation and promotion. So they would actually choose one example of an interactive media product, and they would talk about how it's been presented and how it's used for promotion. So that could be, for example, it could be maybe an educational website that may be, so it could be an online resource, and the client needs there could be targeted at secondary school children. So that would be one method. So that's what, so an online resource, that's an educational resource, would be one method. Then for a merit, again, in addition to the client needs evidence and the addition to the opportunities in the industry evidence, learners then need to have 2 examples of interactive media products, and this is where they need to make some links between them, and they can be quite straightforward links here. So it might be something like similarities between the 2 examples they provided, such as the navigation bar, or it could be some menu or some other similarity between the products. And again, straightforward links is fine there for a merit, as long as that there is some evidence of some links between the 2 examples. And then for distinction, the additional requirement there is that we're looking for an explanation of the links. So it wouldn't just be a straightforward identification where they've identified a similarity, but they would also have some explanation of the similarities and differences. And if for the distinction, it will be more than 2 methods. So it's looking for a wide range here. So a pass must be 1 method, 1 example, a merit at least 2, and for a distinction, we're looking for at least 3 or 4 for a range of methods there of interactive media products. And then for level 1 assessment criteria, slightly different focus here, as you can see in the exemplification on the right-hand side here of the grading grid. So a bit more focus here on the level 1 learners, of their intention of how they're actually going to present their own work. So they still need to be looking at different methods of presenting their work, but they won't need to evidence client needs or opportunities in the industry, because that's just targeted for level 2. So here for a pass, they will need to make general conclusions. So here the exemplification is learners will provide general comments regarding how they intend to present and promote their interactive media product. And again, that should be based on some basic research, so that they've looked at some examples of how they might do this. And a merit, there's some simple conclusions. So it's a bit more than general comments. So we'll be looking for a little bit more detail there in their description. And then for a distinction, again, we'll be looking for a little bit more with regard to the audience for the presentation. They might look at different types of presentation that they could do. Again, in relation to that research, that they've looked at different ways that interactive media products are presented. And then before we go on to learning outcome 2, I'm just going to pause to see if there's been any questions come in.
No, Leslie, there's no questions coming at this time.
Okay, great. I'll move on to learning outcome 2. So this is the practical element of the unit. So this is where learners will actually present a product. And just to remind you that there's no requirement to produce additional work here. So it makes sense to use the product or products that's been previously created, for example, in Unit 3. And what the learner must demonstrate here is methods of presenting the product and methods of promoting their skills. And we see various ways in which to do this. So for example, the internal assessment task, it might request learners to actually do, it could be a blog or maybe a 2 or 3 page website or a PowerPoint presentation. And then within that presentation or within that web page, within that blog, we would see an example of the learner's work, but also maybe some promotion of their skills. So sometimes we see quite nice online CVs with maybe some show reels of some work that they've produced, and there's other various ways as well. A PowerPoint presentation is fine there to sort of promote learners' skills, and learners at this level, they usually find something quite interactive as part of their promotion of their own skills quite fun to do, and we've had some really quite nice responses for that. So it's very much here, the assessment criteria is actually assessing the application of the technical skill of the learners here and how they've used materials, techniques and processes. And then you'll see here that the key indicator here is about select. So even at a pass, merit and distinction, the descriptor here is about selecting appropriate skills, materials, equipment, to create their product and to promote their skills. So there should be, alongside the actual presentation or the web page or whatever it is that they're going to create here, there should be some evidence of the selection process. So there should be some sort of evidence, and it could be annotation is a good way to do this. Learners seem to quite be quite responsive and actually annotating how they've actually created something, created their presentation. So annotation is one good way to do this. It could be a verbal presentation as well. So they could actually, as they're presenting a piece of work and promoting their skills and talking about their sort of strengths and weaknesses, they could actually be talking through the processes during that presentation. So it could be a verbal presentation, it doesn't have to be written annotation, or they could indeed write a small report as well, dependent on what that internal assessment task has asked for. But there should be some evidence of the selection process, of why they've chose particular technical skills, equipment and processes. And then here is the level 1 grading criteria. Again, it's still assessing that practical element. For a pass, learners will present their product using relevant technical and or communication skills. And again, it might be a quite simple, it might be a very simple PowerPoint here that captures some examples of their work as well as promoting their skills. And then we can see for a merit, there's actually looking for a combination of skills and or equipment and or materials and or processes. So it's started to increase the demand as it moves up to merit and distinction. And then at distinction, we're looking for the evidence of the full combination. Again, at level 1, it could be still very straightforward and quite basic, but there will be some evidence there of skills, equipment, materials and processes of how they've actually created that presentation. And then I'll just pause again to see if we have any questions that have come in for learning outcome 2.
Thanks for that, Leslie. No questions at the minute.
Okay, we'll move on to learning outcome 3. So learning outcome 3 is about reviewing the presentation that they've produced in learning outcome 2. And again, some differentiation here between the evidence that's required at level 1 and level 2. So at level 1, there's just 2 areas of review. So the format of the interactive media product and feedback, which I'll come to shortly. And then level 2, slightly more areas for review. That's a selection of the format in the medium, the use of hardware and software, strengths and weaknesses, and areas of improvement. And it's good practice to actually use these assessment points in the internal assessment task. So we've seen good practice where assignment briefs actually, where they request learners to write an evaluation or write a review, that they actually include these bullet points so all areas are covered. So it's absolutely fine to do that, and it's actually good practice to do that. So you're actually giving the learner some guidance of what to include within their review, their evaluation. And then just a note on feedback for level 1. So this could be feedback from an audience, it could be the peers that they presented to, it could be tutor feedback, it could be teaching assistants, it could be a survey. Sometimes learners like to create some surveys, or they could have even some small polls or some likes from social media. So but quite open to the methods of feedback, but it should be used as part of the review. So here we can see the level 3, learning outcomes 3, level 2 assessment criteria. And again, considering there's quite a lot of review content to cover, at pass and merit, there's only actually looking for identify. So it's not looking for analysis or a great deal of evaluation, it's just identify at pass and merit here. And then at distinction, it's looking for a description. So for a pass here, the learner will identify different areas for improvement, as well as the strengths and weaknesses in the presentation and promotion of their product, and they'll draw on support and evidence. So again, that could be some examples of that feedback that we've just talked about. So for a merit, the difference here is about impact. So within that review, learners should be including some reference to the impact of the overall outcome. So for example, they could talk about what their intention was and whether they actually achieved that intention. And for distinction, it moves up to recognising different levels of importance. So for example, learners may talk about the presentation being very pleasing to look at. They may say it was how they wanted it to look, maybe in the terms of layout. However, it may be running quite slow. So what they might do here is talk about how important, or what is more important for their product, for their audience. Is it sort of the fact that it might run quicker, or the fact that it looks better? So they'll be able to talk a little bit, and again, it's only description. We're not looking for a great deal of analysis here, but some reference to recognising the different levels of importance of the presentation. And it could also be that parts of the presentation don't function that well, and they may sort of have had some feedback from their peers that have sort of told them, you know, this area didn't function too well, or I found this part of the product quite difficult to navigate. And again, it's how the learners use that feedback within their review. They might sort of talk about what they would improve in future. And then here we can see the level 1 assessment criteria, quite straightforward to follow as it's quantified. So again, it's identify at all levels at pass, merit, distinction. And for a pass, it's identify one strength or one weakness. So only one or the other is required for a pass. For a merit, it's at least one strength and at least one weakness. And a distinction, at least 2 strengths and at least 2 weaknesses. And again, it's identify. So it could be bulleted bullet points, or it could be very much in list format. They wouldn't be looking for too much description here or explanation. You know, even at distinction, it could actually just be a bulleted list of 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses for this level. But again, it's important that even at level 1, there is some reference to feedback, so that they've actually collated some feedback from others. And I'll just pause again to see if there's any questions come in.
No questions, Leslie, at this point.
Okay, so I'm going to talk through a piece of merit level 2 work, and I've put these in this order on purpose. Usually we would start with a pass and then look at merit, but this particular example is quite useful because we often get a lot of questions of how learners should be submitting their work. So for this particular learner, they've actually submitted all 4 units, so units 1, 2, 3 and 4 within the one portfolio. Unit 4, for reference, starts at, I think it's about slide 69, and really that's more of a reference for when you download the handout that's available to you on screen today, which I should have reminded you of at the start. It's a good point to remind you now, because as we do work through the learner work, there's a lot of text on the slides, so it's really good practice to actually download the handout whilst you're still on the webinar, and then you have that as a reference point to use at your own pace with the assessment criteria, with the unit specification next to you, and it's quite easy then to actually see, well, hopefully it's quite easy if you actually to see the merit evidence against that assessment criteria. So I'm trying to remind you again at the end, and hopefully Kelly will remind us as well before that you do leave, is to make sure that you download that handout. So again, this learner, this approach is quite a lot of written work, and that's maybe the preference of the centre or the preference of the learner. So again, this is just one approach, and they've illustrated a report throughout with things like reference to research sources, and they've always labelled at the top, which makes it really clear. So they've got Unit 1 at the top there and which learning outcome, and they're actually starting to talk about features of an interactive presentation, which you'll probably remember from Unit 1. So again, I'm just going to go quite quickly through this because this is for Unit 1, but it's a good example because it shows you a different approach of how learners may submit their work. So Unit 1, as you remember, is an introductory unit, but here what they've talked about is in Unit 1, they've actually talked about the products that they've created later on and their experimentation. Again, at the top there, they've labelled where they've moved on to a different learning outcome. And some good examples there on peer feedback and how they've used that. So although that's for Unit 1, it's still a valid example of how learners can actually use the peer feedback within the evidence. So they then label Unit 2. Again, it's really clear here. They're talking about their planning for the product in Unit 3. Some pre-production documentation for Unit 2. And again, this is still related to the talent show brief that they created the product for in Unit 3. So again, lots of written evidence. Please don't let that put you off. This is just one approach. And again, some good examples of how to present the feedback at the bottom there. And then before, I think this is a valid point, even though it's for a different unit, this learner has actually talked about selection of assets and processes. So if there is a assessment criteria, for example, learning outcome 2 in this Unit 4, this is one way of actually evidencing the selection process. If you remember, the assessment criteria for Unit 2 is about selecting. Then this is moving on to their product in Unit 3. They've got like some progress here. And then with the review there. So again, still in the same portfolio, they've clearly labelled at the top Unit 4. So this is where the evidence for Unit 4 starts. So they've got some examples there. And if you remember, for the examples, for the merit, there needed to be some links between the examples that they used. So again, they've clearly laid these out with advantages and disadvantages, which is a good way for learners to be able to start making links between different products. Client needs, it's being clearly presented here. Then they've started to talk about methods of self-promotion. Opportunities in the industry, which again is a requirement for learning outcome 1. And they've looked at different types of opportunities in the industry here as well. So they've looked at freelance as well as sort of different types of contracts, part-time and full-time, permanent job roles. And they just put a screenshot of where they found these opportunities. And then they've actually got a screenshot of their actual website that they created, and it is only screenshots for the purpose of this. However, the student would actually have the actual presentation or the actual website submitted as well here. And they've sort of evaluated throughout these annotations, if you like. And they talked about promotion of their skills. And quite clearly, they've got some good reference here to how the product could be improved. And then quite interesting, they've actually done a rank order for the importance of those improvements. So again, that's just one approach, how they could approach the evaluation. So again, quite a lot of written work in that particular learner. That doesn't mean that they have to do that amount of written work to achieve a merit. So they could still actually evidence lots of criteria by sort of talking. It could be a verbal presentation, or it could be in a very different way. It's entirely up to you how you want to present, ask your learners to present that. So I just wanted to point out, there is a lot of written work there, so please don't be put off that that's not the only approach. And then we'll move on to the level 2 pass, which again is quite a different approach. This is from a different centre. Again, they've started to talk straight away, and this is just for Unit 4, this evidence. So they haven't included any of the units for this one. So they've started to talk about client needs straight away, which is learning outcome 1. Then they've started to consider different ways that they might present their own work. At the bottom there, they start to talk about job opportunities. And then they've copied some examples here of different job roles. And then they start to talk about methods of presenting. And then skills, sort of ways to promote the skills. They've talked about digital CV there. Then they've actually created a digital portfolio. And again, for the purpose of this webinar, these are just screenshots of what they did. So, they would actually submit the actual product as well here. So they actually created an interactive presentation that you can see here. We've got some examples of a CV, a website that they've created, some graphics that they've done, some sound and animation that they've created. So they've approached this more of a show reel, if you like, to present their work and promote their skills. And again, this would be very interactive, so they'd be able to actually play the animation, play the sound. And then finally, we've got the evaluation here. There's probably actually more areas that have been evaluated than actually is needed here. So probably not as focused, the evaluation, as it could have been. It only needs to focus on those bullet points at the start of Learning Outcomes 3. So again, just to remind assessors, when you're writing the internal assessment tasks, it's good practice to use those as prompts. It just makes sure that learners are supported to be focused with the areas that they're reviewing. So I realise that was quite a quick run through there. I do hope but again, please do download the handout that's available on the screen. And I'm just going to check back with Kelly just to make sure I direct you to the right area. I think it's in the handouts tab, if I'm correct, just in case I'm seeing something different too, because I'm in as not as an audience member.
Yeah, that's correct, Leslie. It's in the handouts section, and it's a PDF document that can be downloaded.
Okay, perfect. And then just to remind everybody on here, Kelly, they will be sent the presentation as well, won't they, afterwards today?
What do you mean by sent? It will be, the recording will be available.
Sorry,
a
a link to the recording, yeah.
Yes, that will be provided, yeah, within the 24 to 48 hours, yeah.
Yeah, when I meant today, I just meant the presentation of today. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Okay, thanks for that, Leslie. I hope you found that useful. I know I did. So I just want to launch the last poll just to see if your confidence levels have changed. So if you remember rightly, it was 1 being no, a little confidence, or 10 feeling very confident. So that should appear on your screen now. Okay, we've got 50% between 5 and 6 and 50% between 7 and 8. So that's an improvement on where we were at the start of the webinar. So that's really, really pleasing to see. I'll just give it a few more seconds.
I don't know if there's any more questions come in, Kelly, as well. I forgot to ask.
Yeah, no, there isn't any questions at this stage. None have come through. Well, I'll just close that poll off. Go to the final page. Excuse me. So thank you for attending the webinar, and many thanks to obviously Leslie for her support today. If you do have any questions, then you can get in touch with me directly using my email address, which is kellyjohnson@ncfe.org.uk, or if I'm unavailable, our general email is curriculum@ncfe.org.uk. Myself and Leslie will remain on the webinar for the remaining 15 minutes or so. And if you do want to leave, that's absolutely fine, but we'd really appreciate if you can complete the brief evaluation at the end. It just helps us have a look to see how we can improve our service. Thanks again, everyone, and stay safe.